Hey guys, welcome back to my video where I do time-lapse paintings and describe along the way the steps that I took to finish the final product. Today I'll be showing you how I painted an intricate still life. My intent for this painting was to make it as photorealistic as possible to the best of my ability. Just like with my other paintings, I start off with painting the main blocks of color to create the foundation for the rest of the composition. I've printed out the original photo and will be using that as a reference guide along the way. You see that I have already have a lot of contrast in this painting, adding lots of dark colors for the background, meanwhile having some lighter ones up front. This is because many still lifes have that dark and light effect to accentuate the subject matter. I use a few layers for every part of this painting so that the colors would come out more and be able to contrast with each other. Since I used layering so heavily in this painting, I made sure I didn't focus too much in one area at any given time. Once I completed a basic outline or shape of an object, I moved on to the next one until I liked what I saw. Then I would be ready to move on to the next layer. Another important thing to remember is to stop sometimes and look back at your painting. Does everything line up correctly? How does everything match with the reference photo so far? Those are the questions you should be asking yourselves before you move on to the next step. Even though you're early in the stages of the painting, as soon as you lay out the main foundational colors, the next step would be to accurately paint the main blocks and shapes of the future subject matter. Notice how I already have established most parts of this composition already, so you can take a good guess at what I'm painting. I have a more in-depth video about how I take the time to paint the grapes, which I placed a link in the description below. Also, I apologize about the glare from the light on top of the painting. I am working on getting better equipment for my studio. So when I start to paint the blocks in my objects, I also have to get an understanding of what colors I'll be using for the lighter parts, as well as the parts where the shadows will be. I'm not too concerned about the light source because I have the reference photo that shows it, as well as already having the main idea of what angle the light comes from. One of the challenges was painting the cloth on the bottom right. Like I said, I used lots of layering. I first had to get the main color established, which is a grayish purple. After the paint dried, I then would add a lighter version of the grayish purple, and wherever the light got darker around the folds of the cloth, I would add a darker version of the same color. Once I established these two colors next to each other, I then would blend the edges together to create that transition of color accordingly. That, in my opinion, is the easiest way to paint gradients of color. So, when you paint the shadowed parts of objects, also remember that not all of them have the same formula for painting from dark to light. What I mean is that if an object is not completely opaque, where you can slightly see through it, painting the shadow will be more tricky. One example is the wine glass. Pay attention to how the light is refracted inside, both where the wine is and the stem of the glass. See how the light bends. Of course, it helps to study the reference photo, but getting an idea of what's going on inside the wine glass, kind of getting a feel of it, I suppose, helps too. This goes back to painting gradients. You'll notice that I use a lot of gradients in the wine glass, as well as with the shiny metallic parts of the vase, which I'll be getting to later. I didn't realize how much I had to say about this painting, but guys, really, it's not that difficult. Keep studying the reference photo, line up everything to match the grid pattern, and keep refining and, in a way, sculpting together this image. Okay, let's go back to the grapes and how they were painted. They are not 100% opaque, and so there's a very small amount of light refraction inside of them. I add some yellow mixed with some white and brown to offset any overwhelming vivid color, something I did pretty much with everything else also. Then I added some brown mixed with a small amount of green for the shadows. But here's the thing though, there's multiple colors in these grapes. Start to diversify your colors by slightly offsetting the pale yellow and start adding various mixtures of it. It will help out with the texture of the grape. Also, not all the grapes have the same quality. Some have a few bruises or stripes on them, so make sure to get those on there. Use a small brush that can handle the precision. Also, pay attention to the edges. When I first finished painting the grapes, the edges still looked pretty rough. I saw a few gaps in the brushing where the color underneath came through, and it looked pretty sloppy. Pay careful attention to all the details in paintings like these, because everything adds up. So, the hardest part of this painting is almost always when you're halfway through finishing it. It is at this part where the most intensive labor comes in, where I spent much time lining up the objects to the grid and concerning myself with the colors to use for the light and dark parts. It's at this phase of the painting where I question myself whether this will turn out good or not, because your mind can play tricks on you into thinking the way it looks now won't change that much. Even after finishing some detailed parts, don't worry about it, because it's all about how everything done well adds up together. So it's really important to stick it out to the very end, and with this style that takes dozens of hours, you really need to cultivate patience. That's why I almost always listen to podcasts, audiobooks, and music whenever I undertake these projects. So, a mistake I made along the way was the wine glass shape was off, and I failed to properly estimate where the edges of it lined up. It's tricky sometimes, especially when you're painting a symmetrical object such as that, so take extra time to get that lined up. Even though at the early stage you're painting simple shapes, remember, you will have to go back to that simple shape and add some not so simple textures and layers on there. So, the most difficult part of the whole painting was the shiny metallic part of the vase. The reference photo had the image, of course, but those intricacies with how the metal's ornate parts shine like that kept throwing me off. I knew that I couldn't 100% rely on the photo. What I did instead was get an idea of how the light works and use that same principle I used with the other smaller parts of the painting. I used very small color transitions with occasional immediate stops in color so that I can inadvertently create those small intricate shapes that shine out. I improvised along the way, yet trying to retain as much as possible what the photograph offered. The easier parts were no problem. With those metallic loops, all they needed was the horizontal color gradations and contrast painted accordingly. Another difficult part with the oranges. I don't mean the main light and shadows, but the tiny lights and shadows inside the large light and shadows. Notice how when you see an orange, it has those small pores all over the surface. I painstakingly took the time to paint those. The problem in the beginning was that the dots I painted were too dark and looked like bullet holes. I used too much contrast. What I did was eventually lighten them up because they don't sink that far down into the orange. Then I painted a very light halo around the dots, almost like a crater, to smooth it out. So, if you guys are having difficulty keeping up with what I'm saying with the footage, I apologize for that because I didn't realize how much I'll be talking about the process of this painting. I will be coming out with some more in-depth footage about how to accomplish these painting tasks. Another thing is the background. If you look carefully, you'll see it's not that well blended together, and I thought I had already reapplied the paint to try to make it better. That was my fault for not properly blending it together in the beginning. I was in too much of a hurry and kept putting it off until later. And put it off I did. I didn't correct the background with the final layer until I was almost done with the entire painting. So I had to go around the edges of all the highly detailed objects I had already established. I took more time than I needed by procrastinating. So, lesson learned. Always do a good job with the layers behind what you're going to paint, especially when the wall plays a large role in a painting like this. Also, if you don't like the way something turned out, don't stop at just the second or even third attempt. Keep going until you are satisfied. That's what I did with painting the background wall. I finally was able to get the patience to take care of it. I think also it may be that when I reach the final stages of the painting, I get so excited to finish it and showcase it already that I get very impatient with adding the final touches. I've had this with almost every painting, where I'm close to the end and I just don't feel like working on it anymore. I just want to stop or rush through the last part. I don't know if this has to do something with anxiety of showing it off to the world or something even deeper like fear of success or even just thinking the painting is undeserving of any fanfare. Regardless of how you feel, this stage, it's important to slow down, relax, and remind yourself that the way you do anything is the way you do everything. Do an excellent job with the small things, and the larger picture will turn out great. Some life advice there too, I guess. So, I think I explained everything I needed to do in order to get the main idea of what I was doing here. I'll be releasing more in-depth videos in the future about painting still life, and so with this one, I'm summarizing everything that I wanted to explain. As I approach the later stages of the painting, it actually gets easier because once you have all the color and shapes established, as well as most of the main detail, all you do from here on out is continue matching the reference photo with the smaller details, refining everything. I'd say the hardest part here, and again, is the patience. Take your time with the last parts. So anyways, I'm going to stop talking and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. Also, if you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to get further updates on more videos. I'm still pretty new to the whole YouTube thing, but I've been working really hard at cranking out these videos to establish this painting channel. I appreciate any feedback. Anyways, go ahead and see how I finish the rest of this painting. Peace.